All right. Hello, folks. It's Alex Baranowski, and I am um, a rearer. I am one who likes to rear kind of anything and everything because it's fun to have a number of plants, insects, amphibians, and other animals and living organisms that I am playing around with. It's something that I've always been massively into. Um, I have a lot of projects that I do kind of throughout the year, and you're definitely going to be hearing about those in this podcast. Um, so today is going to be our pilot episode, kind of what I intend with this and, how I got here and things like that. So this is kind of going to be a free-form type of thing where I'm not scripted or anything like that. I'm going to really try to keep the swearing to a minimum so that, kind of anybody and everybody can watch this without any offense. So, I generally can be very vulgar, and I'm going to try to be a little bit more family friendly because my intention is for this to hopefully inspire some other people. So, let's talk a little bit about myself. Um, I don't like to do that very much. I like to talk about some of my experiences and some things that I've noticed and whatnot. But when I get to the core of who I am, I try to not deny it, but kind of ignore it. And I don't want to do that. Um, but for people who aren't familiar with me or any of my channels or anything like that, don't worry. Um, this is supposed to be just kind of an organic, free-flowing type of thing, where each episode I'll talk about some different things. I have a couple of ideas, and I will probably have a day of the week where I release a new episode, kind of just depending on how busy I am. In all reality, I might record a couple at once and then set the premieres of them for different days. So that's just getting that out of the way. I'm recording using Bandicam. I don't really have any fancy equipment. I'm not a big tech person. I am more of a hands-on, I need to, touch and feel and actually work through things. I, have a simple, computer. I do have a smartphone, but, I'm not, one of those techno wizardry people who, for my age, I'm not, like, connected to my phone or anything like that. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about, where, kind of my background and, my intentions for this podcast. So, I first wanted to make it clear that I intend for this to be, mostly an audio-only podcast, so I'm not going to have, like, presentations or show and tell type things, because for me, I know that I really like to listen to something while I'm doing something else. So, like when I'm feeding my mantises, for example, or, watering plants or whatever, I'll have something playing on YouTube, but I'm only hearing it. So if it's something that has a visual element, I'm not going to be attuned to it. And you can be, attuned to both the visual and the audio, but the intention here is for this to be mostly audio so that you don't have to be watching the screen in order to be gathering all that this podcast has to offer. YouTube is like the easiest platform to put this up on. I mean, I might put the audio to this somewhere else as well. I have to talk to my friends about that, but I'll worry about it later. So let's start with kind of where I grew up and, some of the things that I've done throughout my life. So I was born in Connecticut. It's a state in the eastern coast of the United States of America. I have one sister, my only sibling that I know of. I mean, when my mother was pregnant with me, she had something weird happen. Like, she sat on the toilet and there was a bunch of bloody stuff, and she thought it was some kind of miscarriage. And I was still there, so it's possible there was supposed to be a twin. I don't know. We'll never really know. Um, so I have one sister back in Connecticut, and I, from a very young age, have kind of been set apart from a lot of people who were in my cohort. Um, I didn't have the typical interests that a lot of kids my age did. Um, I started out with, you know, pet hermit crabs and things like that. I was more content spending time like outside collecting tent caterpillars and inchworms and looking at things like that than I was, you know, playing with kids my age and somebody, um, things like that. So, um, darn it. Okay. Sorry, I got an email. I asked somebody a question if they had a chemical that I'm looking for, and she said she didn't. Oh well, I'll worry about it later. Anyway, um, I had, I was pretty isolated as a kid as far as socializing goes. Um, and I have recently become aware of just how, like, socially awkward I really am now that I'm living in Colorado. That's a different story. We'll get to that in a few. Um, so growing up in New England, we had a good array of various organisms. And, I'll talk about some organisms that have always been, like, really fascinating to me. Like, I'll talk about the tiger swallowtail and how, like, when I was a kid, I was really intent on, like, catching one. And it took me a couple of years of trying to actually catch one with a net. And it was, like, the most fun thing ever. And I think I was like 9 or 10 at the time. And, then eventually I got into rearing tiger swallowtails, and that's even more fun. And, some of the blips along the way. And, I was really always excited about nature, and I was really always excited about science, and, especially plants and insects. So I started kind of my rearing journey. And when I say rearing, I do also mean like plant cultivation. There will be plant cultivation stuff in this podcast as well as insect and animal cultivation. But you'll definitely hear about like my firebelly toad breeding project and my axolotl breeding projects and my various mantises, my insects, moths, and some of my other stuff. That'll come in later episodes. We're not quite there yet. So basically, I had just kind of had my own way of doing things, own way of thinking about things. And when I was really young, I had pet hermit crabs for many, many years. And then once those all had, died, I used the aquarium for frogs, and I think it was just firebelly toads, but I also had green tree frogs growing up. I had a Pac-Man frog. As I started to get even older, middle school, high school, I had like shelving into my room to hold cages of caterpillars, moths, other frog species, and things like that. So, kind of my interests continued to grow and develop as I got older. I went to the University of Rhode Island for my undergrad. I do have some fun stories about high school where I would bring in swallowtail butterflies to hand pair during study hall. Stay tuned for that one. That one's going to be fun. But when I came to the University of Rhode Island, I quickly joined an ecology lab and started to actually like ask questions and use some of my skills and knowledge for, doing science and testing things. And so, rather than just willy-nilly going around, well, I did willy-nilly go around and propagate like every plant on campus. Not literally. I mean like a lot of the trees that were dropping their seeds in the fall. I lived with one roommate who, I don't think he's ever going to see this. He grew up very sheltered from people who were different from him, which is fine, it just happens to be the way some people are, whatever. I do feel bad because, we each had our half of the room and we each had our half of the fridge. And I went around campus collecting seed pods of sweet gum and different crab apples and daucus, wild carrot, and, just 20 other things. And so we had our sides of the room. And because there were 3 beds, like there was a bunk bed that I took, and I had hung a blanket from the top bunk mattress, just holding it in place over my bed so that I kind of had like a nice privacy curtain. Great. And then the top of that bunk had just plates and bags of drying seed pods. So, and he was also really panicked at one time because he was allergic to walnuts, and I collected black walnut nuts, the fruits, and cleaned them in the room and the dorm bathroom. I did get yelled at because there was horrible staining all over the nice white sinks by the RAs. I mean, they didn't kick me out or anything, but they were like, "You can't do this." I was like, "Fine." We will talk a little bit about how to get walnut to Germany in a different episode. Fun stuff. But the main point is he didn't really like me. But, that's fine. We didn't have too many conflicts. And, I hope he's doing well. I don't wish, generally bad things on people, no matter what. I think that, maybe he has grown a little bit, learned a little bit as he's gone on. And, I hope he's okay. I wish him well. Ooh, there's tea time for us. Not golf tea, but like TEA, the drink. Yeah, I'm sitting in my current advisor's lab. I'll get to that later, but sitting in my current advisor's lab, just kind of doing this while I wait for another class to start. What will probably happen in all reality is I'll make the first part of this video now, and then I'll walk over to where I need to be in, I don't know, 20 minutes. So if I'm not done by then, which I probably won't be, I'll pick it up later. So I, was the one that was interested in, growing the fun plants and, seeing how things developed. My section of the fridge had stratifying seeds in it, not food. It was, seeds of stuff that I wanted to germinate in the spring. Milkweed and sweet gum and apple and, and thistle and just all sorts of fun stuff. And, I'm very gracious that people at University of Rhode Island were very patient with me in terms of, some of my interests and, my zeal for just growing and breeding things and, everything else. I did get on some people's nerves, and, I'm kind of sorry about that. I, just was very, very excited about a lot of things. And so, I managed to channel my energy into, sort of a couple of different ways, like a research career as well as sort of a lab tech position, which I will talk about in just a moment. And so I had a lot of fun there. And, during my time at the University of Rhode Island, I really got interested in horticulture as well as various techniques, rearing different insects and collection and things like that. And I really honed my skills then and there. And, I definitely learned a lot about proper hygiene of stuff and properly labeling things and everything else, which was great. Really helpful for me to kind of get those skills. And I will talk about why some of that stuff is important and kind of what my labeling convention is. Basically when I have containers with mantises, I'll oftentimes have a label of the species, the sex. I'll write the date that its final molt was, when it became an adult. Things like is it if it's a female, when it mated, and when an egg mass hatches, when it hatched, things like that. Very useful information, but we're not quite there yet. So I did a lot of mantis rearing when I was in middle school. And so I will talk a little bit about some of my middle school mantis rearing experiences in a different video. But that's, neither here nor there. And then through high school, I kind of switched over from mantises to moths. And so I have a lot of experience rearing both mantises and moths. I've been doing the mantises for, almost 16 years, and the moths for about 10, maybe 12. Was it 12? It's been about 12. Yeah, we'll just say 12. Um, so it's been a long road here, and I have reared so many different species, and I've seen so many cool things. I've seen gynandromorphs, I've seen homosexual behavior, I've seen in the animals I've been rearing, as well as in humans, but that's not something I'm going to talk about in this podcast. In I've seen some really weird mutations and aberrations and all sorts of things. Like I've seen like flies with yellow eyes, and I've seen some plants with like half of the stem like missing leaves, and just some really really interesting stuff. And it's always made me very curious about kind of the natural world and why certain things happen. So let's see. Very ambitious as a child about doing some of these reading things. Went to URI, got a bachelor's in biological sciences. By the time I graduated with an undergrad degree, I had, I think, 2 publications out. I did an experiment on a native sphinx moth, whether or not it could eat an invasive plant that was related to its normal host. We did some experiments on Luna moth caterpillars' response to the cues emitted by predators. And as I then stayed at the University of Rhode Island for my master's degree, and as I worked there in the ecology setting, I also became involved with the biocontrol setting, working with the URI Biocontrol Lab, and I was doing a lot of work on the non-targets, which was a project where we, because of the invasive spotted lanternfly, we were trying to see if potential biocontrol agents, which are organisms that you release to try and reduce the population of your invasive that you don't like, rather than using pesticides and stuff, we wanted to first make sure that this biocontrol agent wasn't going to, or there were multiple biocontrol agents rather, weren't going to attack native species. And so one of my tasks was to kind of rear a lot of these animals, find out stuff about their natural history, teach other people about their husbandry, and, just kind of go along and work on a number of things. I also did some work with some of the native pollinator people at URI, kind of informally, where I was helping to propagate native willows, because those were a good early spring resource for bees and other pollinators. And so that was me taking cuttings of native willows after identifying them as a native species. That's another matter. We'll talk about willows in another episode. But sexing them by forcing out the flower buds so that, we were growing primarily males, because that's the pollen-producing sex. Willows are dioecious. Usually there is an androgynous gray willow at the University of Rhode Island, and even though gray willow is a nasty invasive, the androgynous one is kind of cool. I don't remember exactly how I figured out it was androgynous. I believe it was right at the beginning of COVID, and I was collecting specimens of this species for the herbarium at one of the universities in Rhode Island, not the University of Rhode Island. I can't remember which one it was, but I was collecting flowering specimens from as many trees as I could find around the area. And so when I was collecting the flowers from this one, there were male and female flowers on that same plant. And that's how I figured out, hey, there's this androgynous willow. So, I got a lot of fun stories about a lot of cool stuff that I've noticed that you're going to hear about in subsequent episodes. So, this is going to be, kind of a fun journey where I just kind of relay some of my things that I know. And then I moved to Colorado for a PhD program at Colorado State University. That's where I currently am. However, what I'm going to be doing next is kind of up in the air. Some of the projects I had planned to work on for a doctoral degree never got off the ground, and so I am currently in the process of trying to find a different advisor. And it's not that either me or my current advisor did anything wrong. It's just that we weren't the best match communication-wise, and so, I just have to deal with that. And I'm not, angry. I applied during COVID where I couldn't do a site visit or, kind of ascertain. So, it's just what we have to deal with right now. So right now I am a student at Colorado State, and I am working hopefully on more plant-insect interactions because my work has been both in plant-insect interactions as well as insect predation risk. And so that is a fun subject area to work on. And so I have publications in both realms, and so I've kind of made a name for myself as the one that, wants to help people do things and wants to, be involved with as much as I can. So I'm here, and you're going to get kind of the deep dive on some of the stuff that I've been up to for the past, 15 years. So get ready. This is going to be kind of an interesting thing. I wonder if, maybe today I should just go over a couple of things about, what I intend for this podcast. So I intend to just share some experiences, kind of in the format of, like, I was doing X and Y happened, and I learned Z from it. And, I'm going to try to bring in as much background information as I can, and I want to bring in, as much accuracy as I can. I mean, remember, memory is faulty. It doesn't always, recall things exactly, perfectly, or correctly. Just keep that in mind, especially if I talk about things that were, like, 10 years ago. Like, I probably don't remember every detail, and I'm going to try and remain kind of as objective as possible and speak only on the things that I'm, like, absolutely sure of. But, I do have a lot of very vivid recollections of some of the cool stuff that I've witnessed and I've done. And so this is really supposed to be not entertainment per se, but it's also not supposed to be a like recipe for success or anything. I will definitely outline some protocols. I'll talk about, like, Bambina breeding. I'll talk about my experiences with my fern projects and some of the other stuff that I'm working on. So why don't today, for this first episode, now that I've kind of laid out the groundwork, I just kind of give a little bit of an example of what you might expect. So I'll quickly talk about my fern project, if you will, why I have so many ferns. So it started back at URI. Of course it did. I was working with, oh, by the way, I am going to try and not name drop, just because, I may not have the time to necessarily say, like, hey, person, I am doing a thing on YouTube and I want to know if it's okay if I say your name. I don't want to necessarily go through that process every time because, I'll just remember something and, it might be somebody I haven't talked to yet. And so I'm going to try and avoid name dropping as much as possible because I don't know how people feel about me talking about them, even if I'm not talking about them in a negative light or anything like that. So I'm not really going to name drop. So I was working on a TA responsibility with a professor at the University of Rhode Island. And this person wanted to show the process of a fern spore, germinating and growing into the different stages before becoming a fully fledged fern. And we were using one species, and it wasn't working out very well. So I took it upon myself to start playing around with some other species of ferns. So I became a member of the American Fern Society, and by becoming a member of the American Fern Society, I was able to access a number of different fern spores to see what species would be the optimal for our usage. And so I went about germinating spores of many, many different species, seeing how quickly the different stages progressed, what the mortality rate was like, and, things like that. And through some trial and error, I came up with a couple of species, which I'll talk about in a different video, that are really ideal, namely Cheilanthes acloniana and Pteris creticover abelineata. Those are the those seem to be some of the best species in terms of, do they grow quickly? Yes. Do they have a low mortality rate? Yes. Um, you have things like Phlebodium aureum, for example. Um, the established plant of Phlebodium aureum does grow really quickly. Um, I love Phlebodium aureum, so I'm going to talk about Phlebodium aureum a lot in this particular in this podcast. But I'll have a whole episode dedicated to Phlebodium aureum. Trust me. But Phlebodium aureum, once it's the sporophyte, so basically the spore is produced by the sporophyte. The spore is haploid, it's single-celled, it falls on a suitable surface and grows into something called a prothallus or a gametophyte. That's also haploid. That gametophyte will eventually produce eggs and sperm, and it will get fertilized to produce a new embryo, which then becomes the new sporophyte, and that's the fern life cycle. There are some species that skip the whole gametophyte stage. Like Pelea often do that, as well as Sertomium. Some ferns, there are populations or life cycle strategies. We'll talk about bat hedging and life cycle strategies in a different episode, but there are some fern species that will do, either the asexual spores or the sexual spores, and it's really interesting. But anyway, um, the Phlebodium aureum takes about 6 weeks for the spore to germinate, and then takes several more months for that spore, the gametophyte, to actually produce a sporophyte. Once that sporophyte has developed, it just takes right off and grows rapidly, but it's many, many months before there's even a sporophyte to speak of. So, as fun as Phlebodium aureum is, it can be slow to get rolling. Then we have things like Anocleus sensibilis, and this is not a very sensible fern. It has a pretty rapid growth rate, producing sporophytes after just a couple of weeks post sowing the spores, but the mortality is pretty high, even at younger stages. And we'll talk about, where blips come along in the fern process at a different time. Right now, my focus is mostly on why do I have so many ferns. And so, by experimenting with about 3 dozen different fern species so far, and then you have things like Pyrosia. Pyrosia is a pain in the neck kind of fern, because the gametophytes like to propagate themselves a bunch before they actually produce sporophytes. So, we're 20 months post sowing the spores, and I only have a few sporophytes to actually show for it. Mortality has been very low, but it's been very slow as well. So you have your low and slow, so slow growth but low mortality. You have your high and slow, rapid growth, low mortality. That's what you want. Then you've got your high mortality, high growth rate, and then your slow growth, high mortality. That would be things like your Platycerium and a few other things. So there were a couple of species like the Pteris and the Cheilanthes that are very good for some of this work, because it's less than 2 months from the sowing of the spores to the sporophyte being present, so you can do that in a semester. They're also pretty consistent in when they send up those sporophytes. It's not like some species where you'll have a little cup or a container of gametophytes, and one sporophyte appears, and then it's a couple of months before the next one appears. These guys, it's a couple of weeks, and they're all sporophytes. That's helpful, and so those are good species, and so I kind of learned that. But I will grow different ferns for fun, and so one of the things is I used to start large numbers of spores because I wasn't sure what the mortality was going to look like. And as a result of that, some of the species that I started a lot of spores of that didn't have very high mortality, I have a lot of sporophytes of, sorry. We'll also talk about some of the other fern-related stuff. We'll get into a lot of stuff with flowering plants as well. I'll talk about monocots, orchids. I'll talk about my Palisade peach adventures. And, of course, we're going to talk a lot about insects and things like that. So, I hope everybody kind of stays tuned, kind of gets ramped up and excited, and I hope that we can have a good show here. So, those things aside, um, what else should I cover before I call this one? Um, this one may not be as long as some of the other ones that I'm going to make. Um, it should be noted that I do have kind of bad ADHD, so I might jump all over the place. I'm going to try to keep that at a minimum, but I can't promise anything. I do recommend that, when people listen in on this, they just use some common sense. I might admit to doing some reckless stuff, maybe dangerous things. I don't recommend you go and repeat some of the things, like when I talk about some moth-rearing experiences. Maybe I'll talk about the time I climbed a metal roof during a thunderstorm. I don't recommend doing that, okay? I'm not encouraging people to do that. Um, I didn't get hurt, fortunately, but, the risk of bodily injury probably wasn't worth what I was actually setting out to do with that. It was a random non-native maple tree that I put some polyphemus moth caterpillars on. They didn't do horribly, but they didn't do very well either. We'll talk a lot about moths because that's kind of been my primary interest. We'll talk about orchids. We'll talk about certainly mantises and frogs and roaches and all sorts of fun stuff. I will, again, not have too many video elements to this. It's going to be mostly audio. So if you are afraid of roaches and tarantulas or whatever, you're not going to actually get to see one. Probably can't guarantee that, but probably not. So at least there's that. I don't know if hearing it is any worse than seeing it. So we will hopefully have a fun time talking about some of this stuff. So what I think I'm going to do is I think I'm going to end this first video in just a few minutes because I don't want to just keep droning on if there's no point. What I want to do is kind of decide what my first actual focal taxon, species, what have you, is going to be. I have a couple ideas in the back of my head. And I think that what I'll do is I will upload this, get this out there, and then maybe in a couple of days release the next one. And then from there, it'll be weekly. Maybe I will release these on Friday or Saturday. I don't really know. But do keep in mind that, some things may be pre-recorded, pre-filmed, just because I may be busier one week. And so, if I have enough free time on one day, I might make a couple episodes. And so this is going to be rear rants. It's not going to be angry rants. It's just going to kind of be me. I mean, maybe I should call it rearing rambles. That might be better, Yeah, we'll call it rearing rambles, where I ramble on about some of the experiences with plants and animals that I've had as far as taking care of them and, doing the best I can. And so I encourage everybody to tune in and have a great day. I hope everybody can learn something from this.